I'd like to welcome everyone to the presentation. My name is Joe DeFranco. Today we'll be reviewing mobile crane inspection requirements, including training for those involved with crane work, setup procedures, work area control, and shift monthly and annual inspections. So the goal is for everyone to go home at the end of the day in a safe condition, to stay in compliance and avoid accidents and injuries. Here we can see hurt at work. You've thought at all the angles. You've done it 1,000 times. It comes naturally to you. You know what you're doing. It's what you've been trained to do your whole life. Nothing could possibly go wrong. So think again. So this tells us why we have to have proper pre-job planning, inspections, and all the items we'll be looking at here today. A quick background on our company, Construction Safety Experts. We conduct certified crane operator training with practical and written testing. We do a 2-day program for accredited crane operator testing. Also annual overhead mobile tower crane inspections and load testing. We'll be talking about those requirements today. Rigger and signal person training. We conduct accident investigations. We'll look at some previous investigations where maybe the right inspections or training wasn't in place and the results there. Expert witness services, look at some claims and cases we've reviewed in the past, and also some OSHA citations. I want to start off with a couple of definitions. When you look at the standard 1926-1400, the new federal crane standard, 1401 contains definitions. If we talk about a competent person, that's a person capable of identifying existing hazards and then have the authorization to take corrective action to eliminate the hazards. We would also have a qualified person, and that's someone who has the knowledge, skill, education, training to resolve problems relating to the subject matter, the work, or the project. So when we look at the inspection criteria found in 1926-1412, who does, what type of inspections are there, and who's conducting the inspections. If we look at modified equipment, repaired, adjusted equipment, and post-assembly, those inspections are done by a qualified person. Shift inspections would be a competent person, typically the crane operator, so they'd have the authority to shut down the crane work if there was a hazard or deficiency. Monthly inspections, also a competent person. We'll see that it's the same criteria as a shift inspection, and the difference is that that inspection is documented and records are kept for a 3-month period. So shift inspections do not require documentation. It can be a visual inspection. A lot of companies still prefer to document the shift inspection, but the monthly and annual inspections do have the documentation requirements. You can see annual inspections, that's actually a qualified person, and those are documented and records are kept for a 12-month period. If we have equipment not in regular use, if a crane has been idle at the shop or the office 3 months or more, not in service, it has to be inspected by a qualified person with monthly inspection criteria before initial use. The following information must be documented and maintained by the employer that conducts the inspections for the monthly and annual inspections. When we look at the documented reports, we look for the items checked and the result of the inspection, and the name, signature of the person who conducted the inspection, and the date. When we do these annual inspections or our monthly inspections, we'll have typically 3 or 4 pages, depending on the type and size of crane that we're looking at. We always want to make sure there's no deficiencies listed on that last page when the crane does go into service. Some of the criteria for shift inspections found in 1412, the minimum that we have to look at, control mechanisms for malfunctions and maladjustments, control and drive mechanisms for excessive wear. Some of the important topics here, the hooks and the latches, the wire rope and the reeving, the tires, proper pressure there and condition of the tires. Ground conditions are part of our shift inspection, so what is our starting point, our foundation for the crane? Are we going to have additional matting or blocking in place? Those are items we'd want to look at. The equipment needs to be level before each shift, and then after each move and setup, level within the manufacturer's specifications there. also the operator cab windows, and then safety devices and operational aids for proper operation. We'll take a look at the categories for operational aids and what safety devices look like coming up. When we look at our monthly inspection criteria, it's basically the same as the shift inspection, but again, we said this one is documented, and those records are kept for a 3-month period. Then we move to our annual inspections. Disassembly is required as necessary for the annual inspection. The equipment must be inspected for all of the following. So we would have the equipment structure, the condition of the boom, the jib if equipped, structural members, bolts, rivets, welds for cracks, brake and clutch systems, safety devices, and operational aids. So basically from top to bottom, go through the crane. You can see here on the next slide, at the bottom, the inspection must include functional testing. So to be able to check the travel steering, the brakes, a lot of these devices, we do have to have a functional test there. And the records, again, are kept for a minimum of 12 months. On this same slide, some of the key items also would be warning labels and decals. So those that originally supplied with the equipment by the manufacturer or required by the standard, those have to be legible and good condition. They're not greased over, faded, or we can't read those warning decals. Originally equipped steps, ladders, handrails, guards. So if those are missing or in unusable, unsafe condition, we want to make sure we have proper access to get on and off the equipment. We don't want to have operators jumping from the deck, twisting an ankle, causing an injury that way. Annual inspections, if we do discover a deficiency, what is the action we must take? If a deficiency is identified, a determination made by the qualified person doing the inspection as to whether the deficiency constitutes a hazard or not yet a safety hazard needs to be monitored in the monthly inspection. So we might have temporary alternative measures if it's an operational aid, for example. Most of the time, if there is a deficiency, we want to get that item addressed, get the crane out of service until it is repaired or replaced. But the exception there would be a temporary alternative measure, and we will look at those coming up. So some other definitions listed in the standard: operational aids. These are devices that assist the operator in the safe operation of the crane, providing information or automatically taking control of a crane's function. So a couple questions listed here. Is an anti-tube blocking device an operational aid or a safety device? We would say it's an operational aid based on the definition there that we looked at. Is a 60-ton capacity RT rough terrain crane manufactured in 1998 required to have an anti-tube blocking device? The answer there would be yes. Telescopic boom crane manufactured after February 28, 1992 would be required to have an anti-tube blocking device. If the anti-tube blocking device on the 60-ton crane listed above stops working, we have to shut the crane down until repaired. And the answer would be no. We can have temporary alternative measures implemented in that case. So again, these are the things that anyone doing, shift, monthly, annual inspections, competent persons on job sites should be thoroughly familiar with. If the listed operational aid stops working properly during operations, the operator shall safely stop operations, meaning we have to do that until temporary alternative measures are implemented or the device is again working properly. So we have two categories of operational aids. You can see here category 1. Operational aids listed in this category and not working properly are repaired no later than 7 days after the deficiency occurs. And there's an exception to that. If the employer documents they have ordered the necessary parts within 7 days of the occurrence of the deficiency, the repair needs to be completed within 7 days of the receipt of those parts. Some examples of Category 1 operational aids would be an anti-tube blocking device. If we're talking about a telescopic boom crane, if it's manufactured after February 28, 1992, it shall be equipped with a device which automatically prevents damage. So a positive acting anti-tube blocking device is required here. In the past, anti-tube blocking devices typically required for work with personnel platforms. But now we can see the new requirement for telescopic cranes after 1992 has to have that positive acting automatically, preventing damage for the tube blocking situation. A temporary alternative measure that is allowed there, we would mark the cable, the wire ropes, that it can be easily seen by the operator at a point that will give the operator time to stop the hoist to prevent tube blocking, and use a spotter when extending the boom. Examples of Category 1 operational aid, this time for a lattice boom crane. Previous slide we talked about a telescopic boom crane. So lattice boom crane manufactured after February 28, 1992 either has an automatically acting anti-tube blocking device, or it has a warning system which warns the operator in time for the operator to prevent tube blocking. And that's what's currently required. However, lattice boom cranes and derricks manufactured more than 1 year after the effective date of this standard shall be equipped with a device that automatically prevents damage and load failure from contact. The next slide here, operator in training perhaps. This particular operator was an NCCCO certified operator for hydraulic crane categories. He didn't have much experience with lattice machines. This particular crane did not have an anti-tube blocking device, so basically pulled the boom over itself. Very lucky that the boom did not collapse on the operator's cab there and cause a significant injury or even fatality to the operator. So if we're going to practice, that's a good idea, but get with an operator that's certified in the category that we're seeking would be the best advice there. We could also have Category 2 operational aids, and if operational aids in this category are not working properly, they shall be repaired no later than 30 days after the deficiency occurs. And the exception there, if the employer documents they have ordered the necessary parts within 7 days of the occurrence, and the part is not received in time to complete the repair in 30 days, the repair is completed within 7 days of receipt of the part. Some examples of Category 2 operational aids, we would have a boom angle or radius indicator, jib angle indicator if we have a luffing jib, boom length indicator, load weighing and similar device. That's for equipment manufactured after March 29, 2003 with a rated capacity of over 6,000 pounds shall have the load weighing device. And you can see there's temporary alternative measures listed for those Category 2 operational aids as well. We can also have safety devices. So the two things we would look at, operational aid versus a safety device. Safety crane level indicator would be a safety device. Boom stops, jib stops. Equipment with foot pedal brakes need to have locks except for portal and floating cranes. Hydraulic outrigger jacks need to have an integral holding device, check valve. And then we'd have to have a horn either built into the equipment or on the equipment immediately available to the operator. So those are all safety devices. We can see here temporary alternative measures are not permitted to be used for safety devices. So if the horn at the operator's cab does not work and we don't have a portable air horn, then we really have to shut the crane down until we get that repaired or replaced. We want to look at crane setup also. Part of our inspection, we talked about ground conditions listed there. And this tells us that the controlling entity, if there's no controlling party for the project, the employer that has authority at the site shall ensure that the ground preparations are adequate for support and level to comply with the manufacturer's specifications and requirements of the standard. So have to make sure the crane is level for the load chart to be accurate. We might have to use blocking, cribbing, matting, whatever we want to call it, wood or other material to support the equipment or component and distribute loads to the ground. So if we have to level the crane or increase our surface area, make it more stable, we would use the blocking there. Most crane companies say use the blocking and the cribbing for every setup. The question just becomes how much do we need depending on the size of the crane, the load, the forces exerted, and what is our starting point. Equipment setup, again, the equipment must be level within 1% for the load chart to be accurate. And outrigger stabilizer blocking must meet the requirements of the standard, which basically says the size, amount, condition, of method of stacking the blocking, is sufficient to sustain loads and maintain stability. So when you look at the standard, it doesn't say that blocking has to be of a certain size, type, or material. It really says just that, which is stated, that it has to be the right size, amount, and condition to support the weight of the crane, the load, and all forces exerted. So it's really a subjective determination for each site. In this particular slide, this crane, we can see there it looked like the blacktop was washed out underneath. A lot of times the supporting surface could look good and strong, but we might have a void. We might have concrete that was poured improperly, so we've seen examples of this in the past. In this particular one, we had some blocking, but it wasn't adequate to support the force of the load exerted. This same crane here, this is a 365-ton outrigger, and we can see that the crane was not supported properly. We were on the larger mast, which you can see in the front of the crane there, and the operator moved the outrigger, changed the setup, and did not go back on the mat, and that's where the outrigger went through the blacktop there. So some of our lifts, we might have to do soil analysis, probing for voids, but always want to err on the side of safety, have more blocking and cribbing, and always support that crane. In this particular accident, the individual was on cribbing. When we get near the edges of buildings, that's where the water tends to accumulate, so we may need additional blocking or cribbing there, and slid off the blocking and damage the crane and the building on this one. Also, part of our inspections, we want to make sure we have access to the job site. Generally, if we can't drive a pickup truck to the site, we can't drive a 70-ton crane without getting it buried and causing some problems there. Always want to look at our work area control. We want to prevent employees from entering the hazardous area, so we have to designate authorized personnel that they're properly trained in how to avoid struck by, pinch crush hazards posed by the rotating superstructure. We want to erect and maintain control lines, railings, or barriers to mark the boundary of the hazardous area. So one of the ways we have the work area control in place, everyone's trained and then properly barricaded, keep unauthorized personnel out of that work area. Question here for working gear. When we look at the new standard, it defines procedures for leaving load suspended and unattended. So is this allowed? In the next slide here, we can talk about leaving equipment unattended, 1926-14-17. So it basically says the operator must not leave the controls while the load is suspended, with exceptions in place. So we remain adjacent to the equipment, not engage in any other duties. Load is held suspended for a period of time not exceeding normal lifting operations. Competent person determines it's a safe process, and then barricades or caution lines are put in place. It goes on to say the provisions of this section do not apply to working gear. So that's gear such as slings, spreader bars, ladders, and welding machines, like we saw in the previous slide, where the weight of the working gear is negligible relative to the lifting capacity of the equipment as positioned, and the working gear is suspended over an area other than an entrance or an exit. So the answer is yes, that is allowed if the weight of the suspended material is negligible. In that previous slide, though, we might want to check, make sure we have the right cribbing, right blocking in place. Barricades would be a good idea, so all those things would be in place. Some citations we've looked at in the past. This one dealt a little bit with the work area control. You can see here, this was issued in 2011, and 1926-14-24 was cited. The employer did not erect and maintain control lines, warning lines on the swing radius of the crane, and a $500 citation there. This particular citation also had some personnel platform violations. So not only do we want to inspect the crane and the setup, we want to inspect our lifting devices, personnel platforms, spreader bars, lifting beams, our rigging, obviously, hardware, shackles, everything needs the proper inspection. The personnel platform one that we're looking at here, the weight of the platform and its rated capacity not conspicuously posted. So capacity and weight has to be posted on the basket. $1,400 citation there. This citation went on to talk about the platform did not have a fall arrest system that was attached to a structural member within the personnel platform. So the individuals in the basket and the platform had harnesses and lanyards, but were not tied off to a structural member of the platform, and that is the requirement, $1,400 citation there as well. And the citation went on to talk about a pre-lift meeting was not attended by the equipment operator, signal person, and employees to be hoisted. In this particular citation, they had a pre-lift meeting. They switched out a couple crew members. The new crew members did not attend the meeting, so another $1,400 citation there. So I want to make sure everyone involved attends the meeting. If we have a changeover, switch out personnel, they also attend that meeting. All pins and keepers must be properly installed. This also had to do with the personnel platform, an accident that I looked at some years ago, and this happens to be a pin for a Grove rough terrain crane that had a manual dead section, and the pin is used to help secure the manual section to the boom, and it was put in upside down. There used to be a handle on that particular pin that's wider than the diameter of the pin itself, and you can see here it was put in upside down, and they boomed up to 72 degrees with the crane, and there were two individuals in a personnel platform. The pin was not helping secure the boom. The dead section slid back into the crane, threw the individuals out of the basket, resulted in a fatality to one of those individuals. So definitely the pins, the keepers, getting out of the crane once we have it fully set up and ready to go, and doing our inspections are very important for us. Again, we talked about want to inspect our rigging. Do we have synthetic fibers, red warning fibers in this case showing is there excessive damage? Want to inspect everything there and make sure it's in good condition. When we look at the standard, the new federal crane standard, it does mention where qualified rigger would be required. It's for assembly, disassembly work, when employees are engaged in hooking or unhooking loads, or in the initial connection of a load to a component or structure, and are within the fall zone, the materials are rigged by a qualified rigger. So we talked about crane operator certification. The standard talks about qualification for signal persons and riggers. So anyone within the fall zone, that's anywhere that an item can fall from the crane hook below in that whole operating area, they would have to be a qualified person or have some official functions in there, a signal person, a rigger, a supervisor perhaps, if in the fall zone. 1926-251, the rigging standard talks about inspections. Each day before being used, the sling and all fastenings and attachments inspected for damage or defects by a competent person designated by the employer. Additional inspections performed during sling use. And 1926-753 also has some requirements for rigging, and that is the steel erection standard. On the following slide here, this accident involved not removing the crane from service, which had a deficiency. If we look at the far right lever on this crane, that control is the boom control. If we're looking from left to right, we have swing, telescope, hoist, and boom. The armrest on this particular Grove crane, when I push down on it, it moves several inches. It's supposed to be locked in place. So the operator went to boom with the crane, and the armrest was not secured in place. It caused that whole system to move on him, and it caused the block to move unexpectedly. And an individual doing some rigging, they were rigging up this unit, got his arm caught between the hook and the block and that railing that we see there, and caused some real damage to his wrist, his arm, and definitely could have avoided that by getting that deficiency corrected. We want to talk about shift inspections, also checking our load securement. So if we're traveling with the crane, if we have outriggers that are stored on the crane, if they're not pinned off properly, which was the case here. Driving on the highway with a mobile crane, the outrigger pad came loose because the locking pin was not in place, damaged a couple cars behind the crane on that one. So load securement important for us there. Also pay attention not only to securement of your loads, but loads of other vehicles. What are you traveling behind? In this particular situation, the lumber was not secured. Luckily, this individual got out of the way at the last minute there and didn't have a serious problem. Must have 20 feet of clearance for power lines up to 350,000 volts. This also involves load securement. This particular extension was not, it was stowed on the side of the crane while the crane was traveling, and it was not secured properly. A keeper pin was missing, and the vibration caused the jib, the extension, to fall off, and it landed under the power line, so that was also an issue to deal with, the power line hazards there and maintaining those distances. This was another one that we looked at in the past involving not inspecting the work area properly, work area control. You can see the trusses in the photo there. They were building a new home, setting trusses on the home there, and the trusses were delivered directly under the power line. So the crane operator was going to help the guys and hook up to the trusses and move them out from underneath the power line. And the individual doing the rigging had a wire rope sling, wire rope choker attached to the crane hook, and pulled the load line, made direct contact with the power line. Electrical current flowed directly through the load line, contacting that individual on the ground. So major injuries to that person, third-degree burns and internal organ injuries, and I believe it resulted in an amputation as well. No injuries to the crane operator whatsoever in one voltage level, which is typically the case. So I want to pay attention to the new power line requirements. Part of our inspection, our setup process, always look up, are there power line hazards, are there obstructions in the work area that we have to account for. If we look at our power line warning decals on our crane, we want to make sure we have one in the cab visible to the operator when he sits at the controls, and two on the outside of the machine to warn the ground personnel of the hazards. And want to make sure that the power line warning decals have the updated information with the 20-foot rule is the best approach, like the example we see here. Verify credentials and training prior to our work. So is the crane operator certified? Again, is the rigger, the signal person qualified? We'll look at some training requirements coming up in a bit here. When we look at an operator's card, I put some examples up here. It states the category. We want to make sure that the operator is certified for the crane type they're operating. If they're certified for a large swing hydraulic crane, but they're operating a small fixed cab but do not have that designation, then that will not meet the requirements. So when you look at the operator certification cards, it'll have the designations and it'll talk about what categories they are certified in. Also, rigger and signal person, we see a sample of a card here. It has to state whether they are qualified for hand and radio communication or one or the other. That has to be stated on the card. Also, crane inspectors. So again, who are the people that are doing our shift, our monthly, our annual inspections? Do they have the proper training and credentials? I show this one that we investigated several years ago at they were building a roller coaster ride here in South Carolina, and the individual was not on the proper blocking. And I show this one because it really illustrates the true cost of accidents. A lot of times we look at an accident, we talk about the direct cost, what was the monetary amount to repair, replace the damaged items. And we don't always think about the indirect costs. Some of the indirect costs here, if you look in the picture, there's at least 8 people standing around that we had to account for their time and their work and their cost. And then I'm taking the picture here, and there's about at least 20 people behind me, including the owner, the general contractor, people that aren't happy about this accident. So how does it affect the company's ability to bid projects in the future, do future work with that particular company? So definitely want to pay attention to those things and take the time and set up the crane properly. We talked about training requirements. The employer must provide training as follows. That's under 1926-1430. Overhead power line safety topics that we reviewed. Signal persons, again, qualified operators, certified. We might have operators in training. Competent persons, so what are their roles and the training required there. Qualified persons, signal persons and riggers. Crunch pinch point hazards, and then tag out procedures and startup procedures. So that should be the last slide in our presentation. So again, we want to keep everything in place, provide effective documented training to conduct proper inspections, have safe projects, and stay in compliance. Thank you for your time.